Hey, everybody. I'm happy that everybody's here to join us on this Sunday for a very special Rising Tide Foundation presentation featuring Nick and Julia in Spain, our two great friends, advisors of the Rising Tide Foundation, classical dancers extraordinaire, world travelers, and leaders of the Artists Alliance for Africa. The little link to their work on the Artists Alliance is going to be in the description box for those who have not already seen that work. It's extraordinary. Who you want to help out with a donation or any other way, that will be available also in the description box. Now, today, Nick and Julia are going to do something that I wouldn't have understood how to think about had I not known them. We met, I think, about 3 or 4 years ago. And my ability to conceptualize the idea of what is universal about dance was less than nil. And since then, they have really expanded my appreciation for that medium, both from the standpoint of what is universal in the classical compositional method, both in the arts and what is related to what is common in dance as we find in the universal within painting, within music, within science. And like all Renaissance humanist thinkers, that is where their minds have been exploring, both from the standpoint of what is the physics, the universal principles of dance from the standpoint of physics, but also from the metaphysical sense of the unification of the souls, or the maturation of the soul from the standpoint of the unification of our desires, what we want, with what our duty is, right? Which is ultimately the question of all of human civilization's experience and the fight to create a sovereign citizenry capable of self-direction and sovereignty. So their minds have been tuned to this for a long time. I'm going to sit back and learn a lot. And like usual, we're going to have the Q&A period where I ask people to just pop your names into the chat box and I'll call upon you on cue. So without further ado, Nick and Julie.
Thank you, Matt.
Thank you.
To dance or not to dance? That is the question. This is the title of our class today, and we are going to take you swiftly through in 6 parts. This is the very first part of what will become, maybe, like Matt said, on our own channel, but also in partnership with Rising Tide. And basically right now also is a practice for me to start teaching these things. My aim one day is to become a teacher and start academy in Kenya. So this is, and Matt, thank you for the platform, for offering us like the perfect space to practice another art form, which is teaching. It is not easy to get across ideas. It is one of the hardest things that I ever had to endure with a teacher. Sense and play and the practice of form are actually pretty simple and quite easy to take on. Of course, we're going to talk about that, like the discipline effect and how we reform our emotions into something greater than just play and sense. But by the end of this, we're going to go through and we'll get quickly to the end where we'll show you clips of dance, and we'll also talk about some paintings and how dance is like a moving painting and the frame is the stage. So all of the constructs around art and the principles are essentially one and the same. They're all universal. Here in the photos, just to say, we have been in Malaga and in Granada the past few days, down in the south of Spain. And this was the Museo de Palacio de Malaga, which is the museum, like the Palace Museum of Malaga. And in there, they had some of the most wonderful fine art from the masters, statues from Romans, Athenians, all of this. And it was a fantastic inspiration for this class. And we did that about 5 days ago. So let's get started with part 1. And just so that everybody knows, Julie will be doing part 3. She's taking on the form and practice. So part 1, sense and play and its relation to dance, because I will make this more specific as we go to dance. Sense and play are how we come to do or truly know anything at all. Without the stimulation of play, both children and adults are simply bored. It's very hard for the human being to take on the amount of practice that it will take to reform those senses before first having the stimulation and the central aspects of why we do it in the first place. So Schiller said, actually, sense before form, because he understood that innocents especially are unaware of their sin. This is good because as adults, raising them, it gives us time to nurture the good, like their gift or their talent in them, so they can pursue happiness in many forms and not just be 1 or 2 dimensional, but be a multi-dimensional human being which is capable of applying their reason with the use of form, and then being able to play with that and actually create the expression of ideas, either on paper, through movement, in acting, through literature, or also through music. So those are pretty much the 5 pillars of the fine arts. So it goes without saying, I'm sure as everybody knows, and in these pictures on the side here, it's very well demonstrated. The pursuit will be tough, and it will be full of struggle first, and the achievements will normally come later. Now, sense and play are important to utilize whenever the spirit of the student becomes tired or burnt out, as we often say in the arts or sports world. This is something that happens to many artists. I saw many people, students, colleagues that I went through the Royal Ballet School with when I was training for 8 years before becoming a classical ballet dancer. Many of them found the form so oppressive, so stringent, and a bit of a whiplashing that they basically would give up or exit the school with some sort of either mental or physical condition. As I'm sure many people have heard about, there is a stereotype that comes with ballet around anorexia being one of the major ones, eating disorders basically, but also maybe people, since they did some bad movies, I won't mention them, but also people have become aware of the mental aspects. And now that's led many people after watching The Black Swan to think that all ballet dancers are narcissistic, horrible human beings that want to undo their partners and make sure that they break their leg before going on the show that night. But that's certainly not the case. We would have never got through 100 shows a year if that was the case. If we were all just out there stabbing each other in the back. So that's that. One can think of sense and play as also hypothesizing about life. Creating different hypothetical explanations for what appears is a game worth playing with children almost continually, right up until the point that they actually stumble on a hypothesis, realization, or epiphany on the reason for why something is or came to be. Now they will need form to understand further their idea and whether it holds true. So that's why these things, sense and play, is essential to do right at the very beginning, as these kids are actually doing with each other and their dog in the middle here. I love this little painting. Sorry, I clipped his head off. Didn't realize that. But this brother and his older sister, he is creating the sound that stimulates her movement as she dances around. And even the dog cannot contain his emotion because he doesn't seem to understand what they're doing, but definitely wants to be part of the fun and is barking at them as to say, like, what are you doing? And what are you even trying to do right now, you crazy people? So I would also relate sense and play is basically the pagan spirit of us all in the early days before we became anything at all. And whether that was 1, 2, or multidimensional, that were the case. And every child will have a pagan spirit that just wants to run and play first before we put the rules on them. Now we'll talk about how. So for me, especially, and for many kids growing up that I went to school with, folklore and popular art are essential for the sake of getting one up from their chair. It's very hard for a child to actually show themselves in a world of adults or in a world of people that are full of judgment, let's say. There's many teachers that I dealt with that are simply just judging rather than actually seeking to nurture that great free spirit in you and actually give you skill sets to be able to take that spirit further. They are trying to restrain your free will. They're trying to constrain your spirit. They're trying to actually stop the growth somehow by putting the rules on you before you even have told them what it is that you would like to learn about or what it is you feel you have been given to the world for, to make this slightly also have some religious connotations, because it is there in the Bible, and it does talk very much about this in Cain and Abel and certain stories about the gifts we give to God. So folklore and popular art represent the same intention in humankind, which is to get the mind and body to simply dance, sing, draw, or act. Now, it might not be amazing at first, but it will be the first time that we realize a talent or a gift in anyone. They represent the basis of art that is the easiest form of stimulation. It doesn't require much concentration, and it's just a free will exercise. We can compare all folklore or popular art to a kind of pagan practice where the intention is simply to stimulate us into some form of action. It will not require necessarily beauty, but it will be fun and it will move you. Now, that is the first thing. It will move that soul to some form of action. And that is hard, like I say, in a world of sometimes prejudice or with stern eyes. So we do need stimulation and we do need popular artists. Like for me, before I became a ballet dancer, my mum knew I was a dancer because I couldn't sit still whenever she put Michael Jackson on and was hoovering up in the house. I would start dancing and jigging around the living room. And even sometimes she'd come into the room and watch me, and then I would stop dancing because that is the inhibition thing that all children have too. We're also, you're aware of your own reflection quite young, but it was definitely my stimulation, like my stimulating factor. And I can honestly say I was taken away by the performance aspect of his, and also the narratives in some of his songs, especially later on when he did things like Heal the World, Earth Song, History, Man in the Mirror, which is obviously a very reflective piece of work that was very political also for the time. Not that many people listened, but there you go. One must not frown upon this simple art form, for it is useful to keep the student interested in technical aspects of the art form. So for me to go on and learn ballet, which is way harder than learning Michael's moves, like I learned Michael's moves within the space of a few weeks, but then learning ballet took 8 years. And yeah, that certainly wasn't easy, but I needed still in the evening sometimes when I was feeling down and out about my work that day. Of course, I wouldn't go listen to Mozart. That's not exactly going to make me feel even much better about myself. I would go to more like Michael, James Brown, people that could make me just feel good again and not so serious about it all, right? You do, and we'll probably always need this. So also not just Michael, there's this brilliant movie that came out that I'd like everybody to watch called The Green Room, which also talks about a pianist called, his name was Dr. Donald Shirley. He is included in this idea, and it's so great that they made some popular art to represent his fantastic character. He fell into the trap of jazz a little bit, but that's another matter. Jazz was a trap. Man in Black, Johnny Cash, anybody who's listened, like he is a storyteller. And for anybody going through hard times, it is also, he is talking to a certain part of the soul. And though it's not universal, it will get us through some aspect of life. And it's not too long, not too energy intensive, and doesn't require enormous amounts of concentration just to enjoy. And then here we have Banksy. I just thought I'd throw that out there because I love his political messages and I love that he's incognito. And of course, we can talk about deeper into political aspects, but just the essence is very playful. It's very provocative. It doesn't require enormous amounts of talent, but we can't say that he's not talented either. That's for sure. It took someone to do it, and one has, and that's why they become famous at all. I will add this, it's easier for a popular artist to become famous than a classical artist, but it's because the fine art will simply take longer and the struggle will be much more individual and intense, and you will spend many days in a room alone, perfecting until you actually present what you consider is good enough for the others. And it depends how many others you want to capture in your mind's eyes, depends how many people you want to bring towards that universal idea. So, and the bigger the universality, the more people will actually gravitate towards. So if we take like, for example, Mozart, how many people are listening to Mozart now? Probably more people even still than Michael Jackson, just to mention. So that's immortality. It's way bigger than popularity. And that's just a point I wanted to make, but it is necessary popular art. It is useful. It is something that will transport us. And yeah. So without simple storytelling and stimulation, it is very difficult for young minds and youthful souls to want to continue the struggle that is necessary for achieving fine art, let alone great art. One must always remember to have fun first, especially with children. It is important. So now, somehow we've got it. There we go. Julia is going to do part 3. I'm going to step out a moment here.
Hello, everybody. I'm coming in to speak about form and practice, which is the ugly truth, not as ugly as it is painful. So form is the technique and understanding of how to do anything that one can repeat and practice to improve their condition. So for example, for poetry, you need lots of vocabulary. For dance, you need lots of steps. For acting, you need lots of character. For music, you need a lot of scales. And for painting, you need a lot of colors and shades. For all these things, you need a great level of understanding for their utility. Form is important to improve the quality of sense and play. Any game, creative or physical, will become tedious without increasing one's skill set. Children naturally want to do better. So for example, kids find it very hard to play with other kids that don't have a similar skill set. And adults, in our case, dancing, will find it very hard to dance with another partner when they are not musical. Naturally, one will search for greater challenges in order to achieve better results. Practice is how we come to master any kind of form, whether it be in the arts, sports, or any others. Schiller said, only those who have the patience to do simple things perfectly will acquire the skill to do difficult things easily. I don't have to add anything to that phrase. Practice is one of the hardest aspects of mastering any art form. It requires a great amount of will and perseverance, not forgetting discipline. It is the ability to take one's soul on a climb up the mountain, the summit being almost a limit set in their own mind and by their body. But this is less important. Always mind over matter. So and now I just wanted to speak a bit about my personal experience in the ballet world. In my case, I was blessed because I was born with a very gifted body. I have what is considered the ideal body lines and also the elegance and posture required, with very nice feet and legs and long neck. And so this all helps to have that perfect body and image that we all want to see when we're dancing ballet. But this would have never been enough. And it meant I had to work harder to master the art form, to be able to sculpt and my ways and refine the end result. So this is not only for me, but for everybody who wants to do ballet. When we go to school, a day at school, it would be a total of 8 hours, which we would start at 9 a.m., finishing it at 6 p.m., with 1 hour in the middle for lunch. We would always start with 2 hours of class. The class is like the daily breakfast, where we are repeating and practicing all the steps, all that vocabulary that we were speaking about earlier, to have all the necessary ingredients for later perform choreographies. And after that, we would do some repertoire or pas de deux, then rehearse some choreographies for later shows that we would have, and also do some theory lessons, like the history of dance and music, some anatomy, and others, music as well. And then later, when we are in a company as a professional, this it's all compressed and the rhythm is much faster. So we always have to keep improving. And but in this moment, we do it all on our own, because we have to do a lot of shows, like 120 shows in a year, for example. Therefore, to have the opportunity to keep on improving, we have to spend a lot of time on our own doing all this work. And yeah, it's a very demanding, very sacrificing for all of us. But there is never a real end to what the goal is. There is always space to gain and offer more to the audience. And I will take this point, the form and practice, close to my heart in my art form of lecturing and giving classes, to practice the art of speaking in front of an audience. Like Nick said, we are not teachers yet. We wish to be one day. But yeah, it is a very important part of art to practice the form. It's really necessary. It's not all sense. We also need that discipline. Now I will give way to Nicholas again. Thank you.
So yeah, that's really just blazed through the nasty part of climbing that mountain is the practice that it will take to get there. And honestly, like, just one more thing, it doesn't matter how good your teacher at some point, you will still need to take yourself alone in a studio in front of a mirror and do more hours if you were to achieve the summit. And that is up to everybody. That there were students that I saw willing to do that. I was not one of them always. I would join them sometimes for like pirouette competition, but that's another point in itself. It's just that it's not that student. You would eventually see them take the time themselves, and that's unconditional love. They are. It's an obsession almost. It's something that takes their soul by storm, and they simply realize their talent more than just a gift, and actually want to use it for a certain greater good. And that does take an enormous amount of dedication. And I take my hat off throughout my whole career to many dancers who have done this in front of me. It's a real deal. So part 4, once the 8 years or 10 years or however many hours, they say like nowadays 15,000, what is it, like 15,000 hours, or depends on the art form, but like 20,000 hours to master a form, 20,000 hours to master like any kind of dance or any kind of painting or drawing. Or so now one has practiced their form and technique many times. Before perfection, or at least the idea of it, is even achieved, we can return to play and sense. When I say perfection, I strictly mean in quotation, like we will talk about that. I don't actually mean perfection. I mean the bond between imperfection and perfection, the bond between aesthetics and sense. So the interplay between form and sense alone will increase the speed of the spiral motion that takes place in one's soul. And it will increase their self-esteem and character development through that process, which is definitely something that they need if they're ever going to take on their ideal or their vision or something that they want to talk to the world about, which is a problem that they have been a witness to. So at first, a child may communicate their or others' emotions in a black or white manner, but upon further interplay and development between form and sense, they will spiral closer naturally to their ideal expression of reality. They might, for example, we see many painters painting still life. Okay, so like still life is not technically fine art. It is the practice on the way to beautiful art, right? It's the practice that any painter needs to take on every day and keep on repeating that practice. Or maybe you change the still life to something else. Maybe you go for, after still life, you try to do portraits, where you try to capture the many characters in one face. But that still will not get us to the point of actually creating what I would say is a moving image. So like here on the left, the photo that I have of Leonardo in the pram, looking at the painting of the boys looking out at the storm, wondering if that ship is going to make it to harbor. That's an idea that is very strongly represented and is not a still idea. It's very much a moving idea. And upon looking at it for a while, I started to feel the same excitement and also fear, because that's the thing about excitement. It requires a certain amount of fear to be excited. It's like when your mum and dad chased you as a child, that thing that you know they're not going to hurt you, but you're still scared of the fact that they're chasing you. So that's the same feeling I got with this painting. It's that riveting feeling of like, is that ship going to make it? And all those boys, all those harbor boys are there, like basically, I guess, making bets. And hopefully not too sadistically. Hopefully they all want that ship to make it home, because it looks pretty rough out there. And below we have a beautiful sunset. And that was my point about in the beginning, like when a painter is practicing, or they will paint many still life versions of nature, where they'll do the mountains and the trees, and they'll paint deserts and things like this, simply just to practice their talent and their technique, and really bring those things together. But again, in the top right there, we have Eve holding the apple, the forbidden fruit, which is something I wanted to get at, because the temptation, the whole thing about humans being born with sin is that innocence doesn't know it sinned until it did. And so the whole thing about Eve is she didn't, I mean, of course, she was told, yeah, and parents tell their children not to do things too, and then they still do it. And it's the nature of man, like he wants to know what is on the other side of his choice, whether it be good or bad. And of course, at some point, after making a set of bad choices, the human being will understand that they need to learn more technique and form to not hurt themselves and to stay out of trouble. If they are to refine that talent in themselves, they must not keep on picking the forbidden fruit. They must eventually have the free will and make the right choice to pick what's good for their condition and for their self-development. And that's something that really is like a metaphysical concept that is very hard to teach. It's one thing forcing a child to learn things. It's a much different thing when a child decides that they need to learn something because they are falling into the same trap again and again. So, like I said, we want to let them play with their sense and form and interplay, not get too stuck on form, not get too stuck in play. And as they are growing and growing, those two things will spiral closer together. Still won't give them a beautiful idea necessarily, but we'll see without that. The student over time will realize that even sense and form will not tell their story in a true way, let alone beautiful. They will need to create metaphor, paradox, and a certain coincidence of opposites to create beauty, and it is this construct that constitutes a beautiful mind too. There is no one way to any dream. It will not be the way you think. God has another plan. You must follow that plan rather than your own ego. Your own ego will only bring you misfortune. But if you step on the path of creation and actually go down that path, and that path will not be clear. I remember a poem from Robert Frost called Two Paths. And for anybody who wants to get an idea of what I'm talking about, that is a brilliant poem, and I can share it in a link after. But it's about two paths and one having been less trodden. And the one less trodden is the one less known. And it's not clear, that path. We can't see through the path that is less trodden. It's not like the path that was walked by many. And so there is a certain amount of risk. But then with the risk comes the faith in your creator that he will get you to whatever it is you were defined to do. So if we all believe that that gift is a real thing and is a real blessing, and that we did actually come from our creator, that would be the part of us that we only are interested in sharing with the world. So I say, dare to dream. The knowledge will come to you if you have placed yourself on the path. You don't need to know everything to achieve your dream. You need to know what you need to know. And so when I pray, I ask for God's knowledge and like tell me the wisdom I must know to bring about the dream I would like to bring about. Part 5. Now we get to the lofty stuff. And we are good for time. So, ideals and perfection. This is the part where I wanted to talk about perfection because it's not perfect. And ideals and perfection are very lofty prospects and therefore must be treated with the utmost care and attention to detail. Time will be needed to construct such beauty, hence why form is so essential. You need that discipline. You're never going to make it without that. So on the right there, in the right top corner, that was the cathedral in Malaga that we saw just some days ago. And I went around all sides of it. And of course, the very first thing is it's beautiful. Okay, so I think we all got that. Okay, so then how? Like, why? And so as I kept going around the building, basically, I was looking at all the form, and the essence is very clear. But at some point, also, you're looking for and architecture is hard. Like, it's always so perfect, right? There's very few imperfections because it stands on the scientific principle, which is almost perfect, and that's why these buildings don't fall down for hundreds of years. They stand and stand, and we can just maintain them, and they last. They are immortal because their principles are based on almost perfect constructs. Not entirely, they still crumble, but that's something for the engineer or the architect to go into, something else. For most children and adults alike, this can be both an exciting and scary sensation simultaneously. The sheer weight of an idea and its height makes us wonder if we are even worthy of living such realities. Art and science are especially important forms of education to help an individual realize these lofty dreams and ideals. The interplay involved in hypothesis creation leads us to our summit vision or destination. All great and beautiful art requires a certain struggle, which leads to an epiphany or sudden realization that represents the coincidence of opposites. Beauty cannot come from comfort, but instead comes from struggle in every sense of the word. And I don't mean to say that every day you will have beautiful days where you can, even God rested on his seventh day, like rest. And just to mention, to go back to the form and practice, nowadays in sport and in dance, part of the form and practice is rest and recuperation, because we now know about human psychology, and we know that you cannot work all the time. You will burn out and you will never make it to your summit. You will fail at the first stage. So rest and recuperation is also part of discipline. It's not like when we would go home, we could just eat or do whatever we wanted. It was eat something that's going to give you the energy for the next day. And of course, sometimes we lacked discipline like anybody, but by and large, if you lacked too much, you would suffer for it. So that's the thing. You definitely need that to not suffer, or to suffer as little as possible. The more energy and the right energy that you have, the more chance you have of reaching your goal as quick as or as efficiently as possible. But also at the same time, without causing your mind too much stress or like long-term damage, because we now know that about the mind. It actually takes all the trauma that you experience in your body is held in your mind. I know that with operations, and even though I might not feel my scar tissue every day, it's certainly there. So beauty cannot come from comfort, and it is not easy, and that is what made us good and virtuous. Virtue requires a certain courage, so if we are not ready to sacrifice some part of our ego, to realize a great work of art, then it will most likely not be achieved. For the other to take interest, they want to know also that it was hard. So for the audience to even care, and this isn't about fame or idolatry now, this is real beauty. So why would I look at someone or something, or why would I look or be taken by a piece of art? And why is it beautiful? Where it's in the coincidence of opposites. It's in that we know, okay, first of all, this is really, really hard to do, because, look at how beautiful it is. Look at how refined it is. Look at the amount of time it took, and look at the strain maybe on the artist's face. Look at the pain in their eyes. That's something that the eyes are a window to the soul. And if you look deep in someone's eyes, you will see the pain. And I just want to talk about this very humorous painting on the top left here, so I saw this in the museum the other day, and it immediately got a chuckle out of me, like in a real one, not one of those ones that you do at those stand-up comedy shows where you're 40 minutes in and you're like, oh, I better start laughing to get my money's worth. But no, this actually made me chuckle. And it's basically the model. The painter has put the idea in there, very humoristic. He is painting her, of course, that is obvious. But what he's painting her doing actually is, okay, so the painting is of the painting of her, which is already cool because he's put a painting within a painting. But the painting of her within the painting of her is actually her taking the piss or like having a joke with her master or the guy who is painting her about how good she is at painting and that she's a lousy painter. And probably the joke was, well, it's lucky that you're a model because you'd never like you don't have the gall or the discipline to get here. But he's still got that childish essence, that playful character that he's actually painted probably something that happened in the studio and then thought to himself, oh my God, that is a brilliant idea. Like, I'm actually going to paint that rather than just paint you, which will be like, you're beautiful and everything, but like, whatever, like the kids have got to actually learn something. And this will teach them that art is not so lofty that it can't come back down to make a joke about itself. And I think that's something really important to know about Shakespeare and all the other great playwrights. Like, if we're not laughing at ourselves, how can the audience do it with us? And so how do we actually make people laugh? Well, they're laughing at what we tell them about ourselves. And so if it is truly universal and about ourselves, it will be funny. So we have Don Quixote there in the middle. This is more a tragic painting. Of course, we can see the focus is on his chivalry and his courage, but all of it is wasted in a desert, and his horse seems to actually be on the verge of dying. So that's quite a tragic painting because it's basically talking about the craziness that is Don Quixote. Then on the left here, we just have a glorious fresco, and I didn't get too much into that, but like it's for anybody to take on if they wish. Painting, looking at paintings is hard. Some of them are easy, some of them are hard. If you need time. The image will move after a certain while. Some move quicker than others. It depends on how well represented the idea is. And sometimes the artist also, he doesn't want to just make it obvious because maybe there's more of a political statement in there and it needs to be a bit hidden. So what even is perfection? Just to finish off with this slide, what even is perfection in the human mind? And my idea of perfection is simply beauty, which means it's not perfect actually. Just like that painting, there is a humor which is imperfect, and that's her standard of painting. The imperfection is there. Now it's funny because she's beautiful and she obviously has a skill set as an actress, but she's an imperfect artist all the same and not very good at painting, and that is pretty much the joke. And her master is laughing at not just her, but all people that think beauty is just in the face or in the eyes of the beholder. It's not just. It's more a thing of the mind, and that's how anybody would come to have a beautiful mind. They would think in paradoxes and metaphors and not just simple constructs, and think that 1 + 1 will get you anything at all other than just a sheer addition. When we look at the sequence of nature, Fibonacci or anything, the numbers are not linear. They are spiraling into a greater good force all the time. The one tree became a forest. And if we look at the design of God in science as well, I just want to talk something quickly about science to add in that. It's a bit of a side link, but it's directly relative. Like science and art are one and the same. They're like brother and sister. I mean, if you take Humboldt or Einstein or any of the great scientists, what they are doing is studying God's art, God's design. Nature is God's art, with humankind the final product of all that was created. Hence why when we paint the mountains and the seas and everything in between, and also just to mention, all the stories of humankind started in a place that had a particular environment that also becomes reflective in the culture of that people. Whether it be deserts, forests, coastline, or mountains, people saw the geology of the land and the life that lay on it and developed themselves both according to that and also not just nature, not just pagan, also according to the God-given creator spirit that they embodied from day one. Slide. Now, this is just a finish. I am glad that we've managed to break this down quickly, because before we finish here, I'm going to show you some dance clips that will take some time. And that will finish this off very much with dance. But we had to use painting because painting painting was done before, I mean, whether it was done before dance or not, but dance only really became classical in the strict sense in the 1550s in Italy, in the cities of Florence, Padua, Rome, Venice, Verona, all these places, and then very quickly spread up into France, where Louis, the Sun King, Louis XIV, he instructed his ministry, like his ministers, to begin building a conservatoire. And that is the Conservatoire de Paris that we see today, that the Paris Opera has their school in. But he also instructed them to refine the technique, to actually be able to actually start to write down what are the steps of ballet, and to refine the entire form. And so that's why the French often take credit for being the godfathers of ballet, because they are the ones that first wrote it down and put it into some sort of form for us all to learn from. And it has developed greatly since then, not as quickly as some of us would have liked, but there's a lot of work to do in terms of today's world because abstraction is taking over. But well, we still have Russia and we still have China and all those. So it's not a done deal. And so here on the left here, we have the Palace of Malaga, where all the fine art that is on this page was inside there. And on the right, we have another palace. They're of slightly different designs. They're both Christian at base, but the one on the right has actually Islamic, what would I say, like Islamic crossovers. Like they're in the south of Spain, Andalusia especially, all of these cities down here were ruled by the Moors for 700 years. And it's actually how the Golden Renaissance started in Europe. So everybody here knows that, I'm sure. From the years like 900 to 1300, 350, it was an Islamic Golden Renaissance. And they had held on to the works of Plato and Aristotle for all that time. And it was when Dante Alighieri and other such people in his time started to be able to read these works again in their own language, like Latin. I mean, actually, I've read about Dante. He spoke better Arabic than Latin at the beginning, because even Sardinia, and Sicily, where he was from, down in the south, was ruled by the Moors too. So the bottom part, the whole Mediterranean, basically. But then in the 1450s, Isabella and Ferdinand of Aragon, they pushed the Moors eventually out of Spain and came to an agreement where they left. And that's why the Christian crossover, not to mention that Christians were allowed to live and work and create great art during the Islamic times too. So there was a strong bridge there between the two cultures. And it's just crazy today that they've managed to divide us so much, because it's left their culture and their civilization very much at the moment in some quite deep devastation that we're all, in some part hold some responsibility for. But here we have some paintings. So the ones that I want to focus on is just on the top here, the nice wide painting. That is the destruction of the Spanish Armada. And for me, the point of the painting is that now the destruction is over, the sun comes out, the light pierces through the storm, because the truth of the matter, the historical perspective is that when the Spanish Armada was coming to basically invade us, because we had two empires at that point rivaling one another for control over the trade routes with the New World. Spain had discovered the New World and had basically dominated those trade routes with Portugal for about 150 years. And it was only when King Henry VIII came around that we started to be able even to contest them, after the great work that his father did with Thomas More in developing the English and the British Isles into something more than just a warring bunch of provinces, because that was the case. And the War of the Roses sorted all that out. So the irony here is that actually when the Spanish Armada was on the way, Queen Elizabeth knew already Francis Drake and Walter Raleigh, some great sailors. They didn't know how to defeat it, because Spanish Armada was considered, like at the time, was the biggest navy the world had ever seen built before. They spent so much money on this thing, it actually ended up bankrupting the nation. And that's why we could take over from where they left off. But the funny part, I don't know if the funny part, it's kind of funny, but kind of tragic. It's tragic and funny, as is often the case with tragedy and humoristic art. They are one of the same. One has more than the other. But we actually never even needed to fight most of that armada. What happened is the weather was so bad that the armada got dragged through the channel so quickly that there was no time to actually stop and fight. We kept all of our ships in the harbor, knowing that the water was so bad. The Spanish didn't know anything about the North Sea and how rough it was, of course, and got dragged all the way up the eastern side of the UK. And it was over the top of Scotland that they hit really bad waters. And this is around where this happened. 2/3 of the armada got actually destroyed on the rocks. Call it God's plan, call it what you want. But in the end, the British never really had to actually fight that much or that hard for the destruction of the Spanish Empire. It just seemed to be in the plan, and it was time for an empire to fall and another one to rise. Now, at the time, there was great hope of a republic in England. And as we all know, that did not happen. There were multiple occasions where we tried again, and those were mostly Jacobin rebellions that were faulty from the beginning. So that's the story, Morning Glory. But the painting is funny because the light in the picture, for me, represents that it's all over, basically. Like, nobody had to do a thing about this. This was always going to be the way things were. And if you're a nation or an empire that's willing to go and spend so much of your money on military hardware to the detriment of your own people, you probably should end up on the rocks of some besieged island somewhere, you know. So that's basically the metaphor for me, and that struck me. I've studied the history really well, and there you go. That's my take on it. And then the one below that on the right, I really like this. This is a very political piece, and it's actually specific to the artist. The artist, so I'm talking about the skeleton with the mouse running through it. I don't know if anybody can get this, but I'll just go ahead and then we'll talk about these things after. We're going to show some dance clips after this. So this was a painting done by Ferrandiz. It's a famous Spanish painter. And basically the story goes that he had an argument with one of the architects, Avila, I think his name was, who was probably an Aristotelian. And they were arguing, they'd had a big argument in the Institute of Fine Arts in Malaga, which ended up with Ferrandiz being fired from his position as director of the arts department. And he was so angry and frustrated with the situation that he went home and he did a painting. And the painting, so the skeleton represents him. And basically it's his way of saying that my enemies can only, like a mouse, like the skeleton is a skeleton of a cat, actually, not him. So it's a skeleton of a cat. And the tragic joke is my enemies can only walk upon me when I am defeated and like a skeleton. But they don't dare come and rival me when I am a living, breathing soul. So they have to defeat me like this to actually stop me doing what I'm doing, because they can't actually defeat me on the battlefield of conscience. And I loved it because it's extremely provocative. And it's just amazing that instead of like reacting like a tyrant or like a barbarian or a savage, he actually goes home and does a beautiful painting that perfectly captures that idea of like, that's a painting for like every revolutionary right there. Like, you can only step on me when you've taken my position away from me, taken my money, taken my whole, something that I've worked for such a long time. I loved it personally, especially after the past few years. Then in the bottom there, we have the martyrdom of Saint Bartholomew. Just riveting. Just very, like, you can, it's the light is all on Bartholomew and the shade is all on the murderer, and the entire exchange is quite riveting. And in the bottom right there, I don't have much to say about the top left. I've just added it. I didn't get to the bottom of it, but in the bottom right there, it's a story of a king's daughter. She was going to the prisoners of her father, and she was smuggling them bread because the prisoners were, according to her, innocent. And the reason there's so much light above her head is because she's considered almost like a saint for what she did, because she went around her father, who she considered a tyrant, and she, upon being caught smuggling the bread, when she opened the dress that she's holding the bread in, the story goes, the miracle goes, that the bread turned into roses. And so she didn't get caught smuggling the bread. The guy stood next to her is completely like bemused, because he's like, hang on, I swear I saw you take the bread. How are there now flowers there? And she's, well, she knows. It's a miracle. The painting's actually called The Miracle of, what's her name? Anyway, I think it's Saint Cecilia, but I'll have to get the name for you. It's we can have it in the Q&A. But that's basically the story there. And I love it because she's very obviously risky and daring to go around her father's rules, but good. Because like I said before, to be good, you have to have courage. It's in a world of sin, it's impossible to be good without courage. You would have to take on something. On the right, we have the statue of a beggar woman. I just loved it. I thought oh, by the way, that statue, that wooden statue is 450 years old. And just look how, like the way it's kept its form. It really is immortal. I mean, it looks like it was made yesterday. I just couldn't get enough of it. I tried to take a picture where I could fit my face into her veil, so it would look like she was actually behind the veil. The sandals at the bottom didn't really work, but there you go. So now we must dance, sing, write, paint, and act for the future. I want to thank you all for watching. I'm going to take you now to some other clips. I need to do a new share. So let me get you here. And then we're going to open the Q&A up. You guys can ask me about dance and for anything you missed. So what I'm going to describe here is basically how we in dance do the same things they do in literature or in music, where you will notice, for any, like I said before, for any humor to be humorous, there must be a certain kind of reality which has a certain kind of obscurity which makes it funny, because it's a real reflection of ourselves, that we are not perfect, we're definitely imperfect, and there's some part of ourselves which generally lets us down, and that's not an end in and of itself. If we keep on going through the struggle, we will refine that part of ourselves to become a great artist. It's just, there's a process to it, and it requires playing. And here, I love Taming of the Shrew as a story in general, because Shakespeare takes the character of a benevolent and belligerent young girl who basically thinks that she's too good for any man, and she does not need a man to take care of her. She does not need anybody actually to take care of her, and that's generally the psychology of a belligerent child of any gender. But she has that thing, like, I don't need a dad, I've done everything by myself, I could live my life by myself, I'm not looking for love, and she's very, very untamed. So I'm going to now show the first part of there. Now, yeah, we'll talk about this after. I don't want to give you any bad ideas, but these are the best videos that I found for this. So just let me know if you can't hear. Let me just check the chat. Okay. Okay. Let's see if everybody hears.
Yep, it's good.
It's good. So this is the first act, everybody, where she's still, like, she's the worst that she could be. This is upon meeting each other. The dads asked Petruchio, please try and marry my daughter. Or at least first, before you marry her, try and tame her. Hard job. But even the way she's dancing is very ugly right now. You wouldn't consider it like strictly classical ballet. It's very folklorish, very pagan sometimes, and just horrible. Not that she doesn't have talent, but he has to restrain her. So. Now she's going to kind of pretend to go along. That's the thing. All she wants to do is fight. She doesn't want to know about herself at the moment. I mean, it's according to her, it's not her with the problem. So that's the. It's getting a bit easier. It's starting to work. But she doesn't want it to, so there's still reformation happening. And you notice the key change now, somehow things seem more beautiful. Like the harmony is better between their relationship. The part of there is simply going better, and the steps have gotten more beautiful. Still young and playful, not totally refined as we see. There's still imperfections. Put me down. Sure. Give me a kiss. No. Let's fight again. Really? Sure. Not sure. Getting tired of the game. That one hurt. Now some humiliation, a bit of shaming. He's trying to use humor to get her to realize herself, her reflection. He's literally being her reflection. But there's trickery involved here. He's certainly not going easy, but then he's got to do it quick. He's supposed to get married soon, so. I think one thing's for sure, she likes him a lot. Like, she just doesn't want to. Say this. Okay. So that was that. Thank you. So I just need to talk about the second act, because there's the way we do it in ballet is you normally have 2 or 3 acts. But normally, always between the main couple, there will be 3 pas de deux, and those 3 pas de deux are used to basically represent the character development, which is like the key change in music. So at first we have a soul that is not refined, and she's like completely untamed, to make it more literal. And even by the end of that first part of there, I think everyone can see that she is more willing at least to see what he has to teach her. Now the shame is I could not find a clip of the second pas de deux, which is a shame, because I that's the trouble with ballet online. Like, it's really hard to find full clips of pas de deux. But basically what happens is, so right then he's just basically humiliating her, shaming her. And by the end, because they're alone together, by the end of that entire discussion, she actually gives in, and she's like, oh, I kind of like this guy. He's kind of like me. He's a bit rough around the edges, but he's also smart, and he seems to get me. So that's always a good thing, especially if you're in pain, that someone gets your pain. And then, so in the second part of there, just to tell you what happens before we watch the last one, which is the wedding part of there, where everything is just like happening, and it's just loads of awesome steps and throws, and yeah, still rough around the edges, because that's their character. They're not, this is not Swan Lake. What I love about John Cranko, who choreographed this, is he took on the Shakespeare ballets because he wanted to bring ballet down to the common man a little bit more. The thing about Petipa's ballets is they are very lofty, very high, very fine art. And I would say this is too, but it's better. The paradox, the metaphors in there are much stronger, and it's because of Shakespeare's like literatures, of course, is all you need. But to actually put it on stage is still an incredible feat. And yeah. So in the second part of that, basically they're back at the house. And the thing is, after that first part of that just finished there, we have a situation where people walk in, and she like immediately is like, oh my God, get off of me. Like, none of that happened. Because she doesn't want now the public to know that she's changing. Okay, because she's been like this so long, and everybody knows her like this. There's that thing of like, she doesn't want to change for them, but for him, it's different, and that's love. Like, she's finding ways already, just because of the essence, and the way he seems to understand her character. So in the second part of that, they go back to the house, and basically he does the same all over again, because he realizes, okay, you're not willing to show everybody else. You're still not really broken. You're going to do that whole, you'll be nice with me, but when we're out in public, you're just going to beat my cojones. So he goes home with her, and basically I did this role. I was one of the servants, and it's super funny. There's 4 servants, and we have to run around everywhere with different props, because there's sausages, there's chicken, there's wine, there's all these things on the table, and he's using all these props to basically humiliate her more. And at some point, after the whole scene in the house, he completely breaks her down to crying. And she just sits on the front of the stage, like literally crying, because he's taken the piss out of her so much. He's literally humiliated her so much. She actually gives up on trying to win against him, which is what it's brutal, like it, but it's what he feels he needs to do to bring about the refined woman that he's gonna marry, because he has agreed with the father that he will marry her. So in those days, you couldn't really get out of that. It's not like today where you can just be like, oh, you know what, I changed my mind. Like, no, once, like, those things meant something, and it's good that they did. So now we're going to watch the third. So after that, like after the breakdown of crying, he goes to her. Of course, he doesn't leave her crying. He goes and he picks her up, and he says, like, it doesn't matter that you're like this. I will love you however you are. But you have to also basically be good to the people around you. To love yourself is to be good to the other. And it's fine that you're imperfect. It's fine that you're rough around the edges. That's what everybody actually loves about you. But the nastiness, the spite, the hatred, that's no good for anybody. And he definitely makes that point. It's just such a shame I can't show you the clip because, yeah, it's very hard to actually express. Like the dancing does it without words. Anyway, now I'm going to show you the third pas de deux, which is basically the one when everything is all good. And this is when she's broken. Like, I say broken. Like, she's broken the part of herself that is evil, I'd say, just to put it literally. Like the part of her which is not the part of her, the part of her that she's built up in her head to defend herself from being who she is, that part is now broken, and she can actually love him. And also, even though she's still with certain people in the choir, still a bit like rough, it's with a different humor. It's not actual spite anymore, and she's a much nicer and more virtuous human being with all the imperfections too. I have to, that is the coincidence of opposites. It's not that he's actually taken anything away. He's just shown her the best part of herself and also helped her accept the imperfections too. So that's a beautiful, beautiful relationship. Oh, sorry. With a big screen there and just check. Yep. Okay, so this is the final. This is like the pas de deux of the wedding. This is love. So all of the steps, the music even, there's no key changes in this. This is all just peace and harmony. This is beauty in action. This is just two people in love now after all the hard work, all the struggle, to know about each other, to actually learn about themselves too. That is any great relationship. It will not just teach you about them, it will teach you about you. And it will make you a better person if it's a good love. And isn't she like a much more beautiful dancer now as well? Like both of them can actually dance beautifully together. It's light, it defeats gravity, it's transcending. You don't know what time it is anymore, the stage is blacked out. It doesn't matter what time of day it is. It really doesn't. We have arrived. Still with some wonderful folklore moves that are not strictly classical, just to add, I think, those. That's how the choreography did develop. We have to use a certain thing that's real about us to take any art form further. As you see now how she just gives herself to him, and that's why she goes higher on every lift. Double, ensemble there. Really hard, but they're making it very easy right now. That's a double turn in the air, and he still catches her without touching the floor. It's a common theme in ballet. The girl mustn't touch the floor. Too much. And there's still that child in them both. the youthful playfulness, but with form. Like they're so good now. So they can have even more fun. It's like more fun than they ever had, actually. Filled with imperfections, and that's what makes it beautiful. There's that contradiction there. Theme of variation is a joke. Gonna get married. Hey. So thank you very much, everybody. That's everything. I want to move on to the Q&A now so we can investigate, I don't know, any questions anybody has. Yeah, Matt.
Absolutely. Thank you very much, Nick. Thank you, Julia. That was a fun introduction to the, I mean, it was a very intersectional approach you took, which is exactly what we expected of you, and that is really what I think is going to feed a lot of the conversation. And I know for myself, what I really appreciated was the question of transformation and just seeing the both the style of dance in the beginning of the Taming of the Shrew being one thing, and then just seeing it transform according to the story and the transformation of the quality of the characters is really, really interesting. And seeing how that meshes with music as well is fun. So there's
bear in mind,
Yes.
bear in mind, like with any art form, for the student or the audience to really know what they're looking at. Like it's the same with me with painting or anything. I didn't look at my first painting and just understand. You have to nurture and nourish yourself with the good food. You have to go and drink from the well. And the more you'll watch, the more you'll like. Opera is also good for opera and dance are the same, right? It's not just singing like out in the open. There's this quality of action, and that's the acting, that's the drama part. And so while you're dancing all those steps, that's all done over 8 years, where you practice every single step, every single lift. Some lifts are dead, some lifts are using momentum. Everything has different physical constructs too that are based on scientific principles as well. It's not that ballet just came out of like, of course, not out of sense. It's literally out of the same scientific principle. Like very much like what Da Vinci was talking about. That's the beginning of how we started to understand, like doing a double tour in the air is based all on spiral motion. It's the same as a tornado. How do you stay together without your arms flinging to the side? There's a position for that actually sucks you in rather than throws you out. Now, the scary part is I've had moments where I've lost the the visualization and the feeling. And I've done a double tour. Actually, Matt saw it once, and I've had nightmares about that performance. But I did a double tour and didn't land on my center, landed off, and had a bit of a catastrophe, on stage there. So it's it's a mixture of feeling of like, it's not just a mixture of feeling and form, but at some point, you know, when those two things come together, you definitely know it's a transcending feeling, and you have literally transported yourself into someone else. Like whenever I did character roles in Stuttgart, there were these moments on stage where I'd like totally forget that there was an audience. It's like 2,000 people sat out there, but I'd literally, I'm not joking as well, I'd forget that they're there because you'd be so in like on Jagen or whatever. And like, you know, I remember like there's this scene with Onegin and Lenski where Onegin has danced with his wife to be, and Lenski takes his glove and like slaps him, which in those times, if you took your glove off and slapped someone around the face, it was the I want to duel you, which is a fight to the death. And Onegin is like, no, like the whole discussion's going on. He's like, no, you can't be serious about that. And Lenski takes his glove again, and he does it now twice, like bam, bam, and it's on the music. And I remember like in this whole, like I was part of one of the lower characters, and I was part of the scene, and it was so riveting what was going on stage that we literally forgot that anybody was watching. And like when we went out and like, you know, you go and do the signatures and everything, and people are waiting backstage like for you to come out, everybody was like, you know, had like cried and stuff, and like you could see their faces were a little bit like ruined because like what they just saw was like a real event. Like, okay, art, I understand that thing, people think it's so lofty and that it gets away from them. It's like, no, like if you ever watched a performance that actually things were happening on stage, and it really, like when he slapped him, like he didn't hold back. Like there was a red mark on Onyegin's face when we went off for the break. It was a real like whack. And that's why everybody on stage was like holding each other's shoulders, like with the nails going in, like, oh my God, he actually just did that. Like, so you are transported. You're not Nick Jones or anybody anymore. You're whoever you are, like whoever you've been defined as, like whoever they've given you as your role. And you really have to, every rehearsal, as much as your energy can afford, you're investigating like how that feels. And many times I would get it wrong, but then eventually by the time after 6 weeks of rehearsal, we get on stage, and you'd have these shows that everybody, not just the audience, is transported, but everybody on stage too. So
right.
Anyway, I'm done. I won't talk too much. Like you know, we could do whole class on that alone. But yeah,
that's cool. We'll get a couple of questions. Bruce was the first to get in there, so Bruce, go for it.
Thank you. It's been so long since I picked up the script. I've got a more substantial question after this. The leads in that show, their names are Kate and Petruchio.
Yeah, Katarina and Petruchio. Yeah,
I couldn't go on with my life until I clarified that. Thank you very much.
Yeah.
Two questions, actually. The first, spiritually, because you alluded to it in your great teaching in those slides and so much of art. I'll just describe this. Whether you saw this movie or not, I believe, Nick, if I phrase and get these ideas out in the question, hopefully it'll give you something to respond to. A movie called Il Postino, if I remember correctly, about a poor villager. For whatever reason, his assignment is to get on his little bicycle and deliver letters to the famous poet now, Pablo Neruda, who is staying nearby. And I forget the main story. It's probably something like, because he's delivering these letters, the postman is falling in love. But while he's up there, it's a long trip. This is Bruce's memory. I could have this very, very wrong, but this is the impression that's deep inside me. While the postman is falling in love, he's also maybe having a glass of water with this genius poet, Pablo Neruda, and discussing life and love and poetry. And there was a moment that blew me away because of what I was studying and thinking about life and spirituality and the nature of reality at the time, Neruda must have been talking about metaphor, as you did in your teaching.
Yep.
And this poor villager asks him, is everything a metaphor? And that rang inside me personally as like a gong. And that's before I really read about quantum physics and the holographic nature of reality. Is everything really a metaphor? What do you make of that, Nick? And then I have one last question.
I would say that everything that's true would be a metaphor, yes. Like, there has to be a coincidence of opposites, and just because you might think of it through logic or through sense doesn't mean it will equate to those two things. No, it's certainly a paradox, it's certainly a metaphor. We see that in science too. Like, there needs to be, you could do as much observation as possible, and then you could do as much analysis as possible, and still there will be that final leap in the creative mind, that final leap of where you understand that you're not really knowing everything. And it's there that you will, when they talk about epiphany, they talk about it literally being like a ray of light, that it came down onto you. And it's when you've basically gotten to like within 5 feet of your summit, basically God's going to give you that final. And that's why we have to keep on struggling. It's that struggle and that leap of faith, knowing that at the end, all of your means will equate to a glorious ending, to a beautiful ending. And it's only through metaphors and seeing life like truthfully like that we'll actually achieve whatever vision God or our creator put in our mind as a young child when we were innocent, or maybe later on. It would require metaphor to get there. It would require you looking at your life as a grand metaphor to actually achieve it. And I've tested both logic and sense, failed in both, burnt myself out in both, torn myself up to get nowhere. And then upon going back to humility, honesty, and subservient, like some sort of service for the greater good, all of a sudden I make great progress. It's when I actually work for the other that I find in myself the things that I don't even know are there. So that also is a paradox. And the more we're thinking like that, the closer we are to great art, the closer we are to a beautiful mind. And it resonates deeply what you say. I think the postman delivering all the letters, the value in him is not just delivering the letters, it's that childish nature to be interested in his subject matter and to study this great poet to the point that he comes to understand. So are all things a metaphor? And I mean, in the question, I think he knows the answer anyway.
Yeah, and that moment meant to me a confirmation of the idea that what we experience as humans is something of an illusion, and the one that exists, eternal, is appearing to itself as all of us. And the wisdom of do unto others as you would have them do unto you, I love to imagine the wisdom of that is because when we do unto others, we are doing unto ourselves because of the oneness of reality. And everything is a metaphor for that true part of our nature or reality or of existence, that one thing, which is an eternal, loving, creative essence that is emergent as all we experience. And one certainly gets that when you hear what people who've survived near-death experiences experienced and come back and just say, oh, this isn't real. This is such a tiny, tiny faux version of reality and existence. And
but those stories are the best.
Well,
because
don't. Yeah.
like the ones where there's like the good stuff where there is that faith aspect. It's in that you realize you could never do something great all by yourself. You would be serving the other, and in the image of God, the other is, as you just mentioned, we are all collectively the one image of God. So we are our creator's statue, and we have to live and play in that manner, and take risk with ourselves, because you will return to where you came from only through the good service. And yeah.
Couple other quick things. Were the dance at the beginning we saw and the dance at the end from the same production?
Exactly. So I'm glad you asked. Yeah.
Well, the reason
like
and the reason I ask is because they both
same production? No, but same ballet.
but different actors and dancers.
Sadly, yeah.
I would have thought, boy, what they can do with costume and makeup. No, I really,
I know, right?
I wanted to clarify that with you.
And just a question, which one did you prefer?
Prefer? Ooh.
Which one which one resonated with you more? Which one did which couple did you enjoy aesthetically the most?
The second one.
Yeah.
I don't know if it's because maybe you hypnotized me, Nick, by telling me, look at the love, look at the harmony, look at the happiness, look at the joy, look at the playfulness.
No,
I was.
They gave me that. So I'm glad you said that, because it means we think the same. And it's not just about thinking the same. It's just, I like to know that when we are a witness to things, it's not an illusion. What we feel, what we think from it is the same. Like you understood, it's not about technique, it's not about sense, it's the way that they brought it all together. They were of a higher quality artist than the first couple. And that's why I didn't want to say before. I was going to say it, and I was like, oh, I don't want to distort the audience's view. Because if I tell them already what I think, they're going to maybe like swing to that later. So glad that you agreed. And that's important. Yeah.
Well, by asking me, you just demonstrated the point of my next question, because I trained for years as an actor. And my note here was to ask about your thought. So much of art appreciation, Nick, to me, is well facilitated by a mentor's questions with a beginner to cause that beginner to begin to see with new eyes. The mentor's questions become the students' questions along these lines. In acting class, a beginning acting class, you get a scene up in front of the class, and it's beautiful when a teacher then asks one by one and causes them all to ask and account for themselves, like you did to me. Which dance did you prefer? Based of the scene we just saw in front of us, what did you like about it? It was good. That's the amateur's answer. It was good. I liked it. I don't know. Okay, if you did know what you liked about it, what did you like about it? And it's like pulling the cord of a lawnmower that won't start. You want to get those thought process started so they can name, that's what I liked about it. Great. Yeah. What didn't you like about it? It was boring. Okay, what was boring about it? I don't know. Okay, if you did know, what was boring about it? And you want to go north and south, and you want to go east and west. Okay, this is what you liked about it. This is what you didn't like about it. What would you want? What would you suggest more of? What would you want more of? Flesh that out. Okay, what could they eliminate? And I got to tell you, I'm 40 years into thinking like that when I look at some things, artistically, whatever. So that's just your thoughts about developing one's artistic analysis. Your thoughts, please.
Hypothesis. Yeah, it's really important to keep on challenging them to actually get to the center of what it is, the critique, because the critique in children is important. They do actually have something to teach us. That's why they were born. And again, that creative spirit is there. Like, we can teach them a lot about this world, but it's more important to teach them what they need to know so that they can offer us the gift that was given. And yeah.
Thank you.
Thank you, Bruce. That was really great.
Thanks. All right, we got a couple more questions here. There's one question from somebody named cryptically S. S has a question. So S.
For Matt, though?
I don't think so. I think it's for you. Why would somebody ask me a question?
Don't know. I said Fama.
But everybody's
There's S.
on default on mute. So you have to unmute yourself to ask a question.
Is S still here?
2 seconds. Might have.
Oh, S is still here.
All right, there. So that S is maybe struggling with the mute unmute function. So let's just jump to Jerry.
Hey, Jerry.
Okay. Hi, Nick.
Hi.
Good to see you again.
And you, sir. How you doing?
Just a quick comment before my question, because the first clip you showed of them dancing, it reminded me of what you had earlier been talking about of, folklore and popular art. And, as children, we all are into that. But at a certain point, we have to educate ourselves to try to learn fine art. And I don't think they do that. Well, they didn't do it properly when I went to school. I don't know what the school is like now. I wish they would do more of just educating people on all aspects of art. Instead of learning poetry, we learn grammar. Well, yes. But anyway, the first clip you showed me.
It's so true what you say. We learn grammar instead of poetry. And why would you need to learn grammar? If you learned poetry, you would understand grammar. Anyway, go on.
The first clip you showed me, it reminded me of that. The girl who kind of was not dancing beautifully. She was still into popular art, and he was trying to teach her fine art. I don't know if you were trying to demonstrate that in the clip, but that's what you did to me. That's what I saw through it.
Super good, Jerry.
Now, my question is on the second clip. So I see them dancing, and I don't know much about ballet. I really am excited to learn more. But he's lifting her up and spinning her around and throwing her, and she has no fear. Like, if that was me, I'd be terrified that he's going to drop me and fall. So the way they're dancing, she has no fear. And the word I use to describe it is confidence. She's totally confident in him. And it's a concept I've really been struggling with later, this idea of confident. And I know with you being a dancer, you would understand that. And I was just wondering, how do you get that confidence out there? So you're not afraid of falling or whatever, because that's my problem, the confidence.
The confidence. Yeah, well, okay. So I'll strip that down quickly. Okay, so growing up, I had a lot of confidence. Like going on stage was like easy as like natural performer, like wanted to be in front of people, like exposed, and was quite happy to go out there and just throw it all. And that was considered confidence. And then there was something in my career around 28 where through bad mentoring and people kind of attacking my character quite a lot, and that confidence waned very quickly. And what I found is that I actually was left with a certain esteem that was like not good. And then I realized, okay, so then maybe it was that my esteem was never strong enough to overcome these tyrants. Now, of course, there's a limit to us. Like, I've now come to a more balanced side, and instead of putting it all on myself, I've understood that there are certain limits to society at the moment, and we are surrounded in the arts world, especially by very dark characters, and they have no intention of actually doing anything artful or requiring any kind of beauty whatsoever. So as a kind of off link in and of itself, just to talk about something personally, but to actually gain the confidence, or what I would like to say, to gain the esteem in your partner, which is a more solid and solid foundation, like for a relationship to build on, rather than confidence in one another, to actually have an esteem, which is a certain kind of trust. So like, that's the thing, like when they were rehearsing, their mistakes would have been made. And it's actually in the mistakes being made that he still saved her. He still found a way. She still found a way also. When she noticed a mistake happen, she found a way to make it easier for him. So she caught herself also when she landed. And that sometimes happens on stage too. Sometimes the audience doesn't even notice a mistake happened, and they say, hey, you know, when you did that part there, that was so beautiful. And they say, that was a mistake. And they go, oh no. And it's like, well, why was it so beautiful? And it's like, oh, because everything that happened in that moment was real, and you used all of the form and the emotion that you had at the time to save one another, and you sacrificed a part of the choreography to actually create a real event between two people where they had to act for one another right now because, oh, I've slipped. Another hand, I've managed to still gravitate, managed to still keep her lifted, managed to still stop everyone seeing the mistake. And that's that coincidence of opposites. It's actually those shows that make people cry the most. For example, there's a part in this ballet where she kicks him in the nuts. And of course, we're wearing a jock strap, so it's, you know, just to describe, you pull everything up, it's very exposed. And if anybody catches you in that place during when you're wearing that kind of uniform, it's like immediately like uncomfortable. Anyway, I saw a show where the girl she lost it. Like, she was in the character, and she, of course, still intended to act that part, but he moved at the same time she moved, and she actually smashed him. And he fell to the floor on the stage. It was totally real. And of course, at first, the crowd burst out laughing. Now, of course, they all knew he had been hit. He was down. And I think for any people, when a man is down like that, it is funny. And the crowd, we were in Japan or somewhere, like the crowd burst out laughing. And of course, he couldn't get back up. So they closed the curtain. It was like 5 minutes, 10 minutes. He was on the side of the stage. Kind of threw up a few times because the adrenaline. Now, even with all of that, and they became very aware that a mistake had been made, but still got a real reaction. And for all the dancers in the wings, we were somewhere between like, oh, you know, shit, is he going to do it again or not? Nursing him, but it was super funny. We were with the audience, right? Like, I was on stage, and it was hilarious, of course. So when after 10 minutes, like, actually my brother started putting on his costume, because the idea was that he wasn't going to be able to go out and finish the ballet, which we only had like 10 minutes left. So anyway, after, you know, throwing up a bit, he actually gets up and he's like, no, I'm fine. I'm going to finish it because they're out there waiting. We're on tour. This is very special. They got to see me. If someone goes out, they're going to know it's going to spoil everything. And when they came back on stage, they repeated the whole part of there again. And the crowd at the end, when they finished, they went nuts, like mental, which for Japan is like a big deal. Because, like, you know, anyone who's been to Japan, the customs and traditions are very, very strict. Strict, is that a good word? So somewhat the demeanor is very ordered. And so to get that kind of real human reaction was just a really, like, even more powerful thing, because we knew, and every other night had been very uniformed, but that night was human, and it was very special. And so to have that kind of esteem, you need to have made mistakes with one another for the 6 weeks prior to your show. And it's through that development. Often, once you have that kind of relationship, they don't change you for other ballets. You keep building that ballet on ballet with the same woman. So you become lovers without the private part. But on stage, that artistic relationship is the same as a man and a wife, or a husband and a wife. That the same level of trust. And sometimes partners on the outside have a big issue with that. It's very hard to get used to the fact that your husband or your wife is actually sharing. It's the same with actors, right? Like, is actually sharing these real, because it's not fake. It's a real emotion. But it's just when the curtain goes down, you're like, okay, back to business. I'll see you tomorrow. Love you, but, you know, like, have a good one. So, and artists are very blasé in the outdoor world for that reason, because it is so real on stage. You expend so much energy telling everybody else about themselves that when you do come off, it's like, oh, go away. So, like, and that happens with a husband and wife too. It's that same relationship. It's the esteem built up after lots of mistakes, but still making it work for one another, still chipping away at your block so that they can have an easier life. And that's the same in any great artistic relationship too. That's the only way you could trust and have esteem for someone, and actually put your body in their hands and know that whatever goes wrong, you've got me. And it's in the eyes. It's like, yeah, I've got you straight away. You don't even ask that question. And that's the thing, you don't even ask the question at some point. Otherwise the audience won't be moved. You have to take a risk. It's that you might fall over, even you might get kicked in the balls, but well, those ones end up being the most beautiful ones. They end up being the ones that everybody screams for. So yeah.
Thanks, Nick. Thank you.
My pleasure. My great question. Thanks for that one.
Adam, are you still there, Adam?
I'm here, yes.
All right.
Hey, Adam.
Hi. Excellent presentation. I liked how it was touched on, everything, all sorts of fields, philosophy, visual arts. One of my backgrounds is in music, and I'm especially interested to hear some more thoughts you have on that. I listened to an interview some years ago with Twyla Tharp, and she said that, tongue-in-cheek, all the best composers really wanted to be dancers. So I just wanted to get a dancer's take on what makes good music for dancing, and the relationship from your end you see between music and dancing.
Yeah, I'd say all great dancers want to be composers. It's that. It's the same, like that relationship between man and wife. And if you're a good dancer, the first thing you have respect for is the music. So like, there was something I once, like a kind of joke, but I forget it now. Like we were trying to sculpt things before, and Huli was saying like, the thing is, if you were to dance with anybody, the first thing you would expect them to be is musical. And so you couldn't dance with anybody if they weren't musical. Like we have this with kids, right? Like you try to take a kid up at the disco. Some of them have just got it. They're like 1-2 step, and you're like, whoa, you got rhythm. Like, nice, that's cool. But then other kids you take up, and there's a beat, there's a harmony, there's something going on. Even if it's folklore or popular, they just say they don't have right now natural rhythm, and so there's a way to get them there quite quickly. But what we're talking about here is the relationship between things, and it's true. Like every dancer love the music before the dance. Yeah, because we're so envious that they can do that. It's like, all I can do is move to you, but you want to move yourself. And I've tried with music, and I'm all right, but like that's about it. And there's a good reason for that, and I can do other things well, but just music, like I tried in school, and I did music GCSE, and like understood the form and all of it very, very well, studied it really, really hard, loved the subject. I've always sung pretty well, but it's your gifts are your gifts, and if anything, but the love is the same. Like it's because I'm a good dancer that I'm a lover of music, and I was a lover of music before I moved at all. And yeah, I think that encapsulates it. Like that relationship is a duality of such. And so when they watch us as well, I've had that from conductors too, where they're like, oh, I wish I had rhythm like that. I wish I had it in my body. And it's like, well, that's the thing. Like dancers don't actually need music. Once you know music, you can dance like with your ear, because you can imagine the music, right? Yeah, you can still hear it. Like when I walk down the street sometimes, and I'm just like, and you just start moving, and it's just because you've got that tune in your head. Instead of seeing music, I see movement. So it's just my reaction to that is that. And I've seen conductors also, when they're playing their music, they're trying to move as well like a dancer, but it's just not there. They are a conductor, they are a composer, and if you ask them to do a hop, skip, jump, like they would be like, oh, I don't know what to do. So yeah, but then they understand rhythm and harmony and melody so well. So there's these contradictions in us that create the beauty itself. And I think that's cool, because you'll always need someone else to become the great artist you wish to be. And it's in that other that you're going to actually keep on finding everything you need to know to get that choreography or that set of steps out. Like how much discussion I would have to have with the composer. Oh my God. A lot to really understand what he's trying to say, and then to talk to him about like what I want to say, and then to come to some sort of alignment on those things. That's what Petipa and Tchaikovsky did, right? When they made the first great ballets, Tchaikovsky and Petipa were working in the same building. And we've danced in that theater. It's the Bolshoi in Moscow. And Julia and I were there like 7 years ago, and we saw their busts on the wall. And I remember like saying to Julia, like, isn't it crazy that we're walking and breathing the same air as those guys? And how much like they were just human beings at that point. They weren't immortal characters yet. They were just working so hard, struggling with each other every day, had each other to like rebound off like a ping pong machine, and just keep on climbing that summit together until they got their piece. And then they were like, all right, well, I'm knackered, that will do. Like, you know, it's like any artist as well, by the end, they're not ever completely satisfied. They're like Hudi said before, in the form and technique, there is no mountaintop. It's all in your mind. You're shooting for the stars. You won't probably get there. You'll land on that moon. That is enough. It doesn't feel like it, but after like some years, when you watch yourself back, it's enough. You're somewhat elevated.
Thank you.
Pleasure.
Yeah, I mean, it's a beautiful idea, right? Like that we usually tend to think of music as something that exists for the audio domain of the human condition, and dance is something purely visual. It's a relatively, you know, you're looking at a body in motion. It's not like you're singing or playing an instrument while you're dancing. It's a silent thing that appeals to the visual domain. But to get a fusion of the two, you're sort of like a silent instrument for an orchestral piece or whatever. It's a fun concept that you're bridging the divide in a wonderful way.
Thanks, man.
Question two, are there examples of operas that infuse? I know there's Wilhelm Tell that have like both an opera, like a singer, at the same time as you have dancers at different moments. Are there many other examples of operas that fuse ballet?
Some people in like the modern times, they've tried to do this a bit, but they abstractified the production, and that spoiled it. There was an RFA and Eurydice done from the music's from Gluck, but then the music's not that fabulous, and the adaptation of the story of RFA and Eurydice is also not that great. So there's been bad attempts. I mean, the one that you said is probably one of the best. It's something that I've thought about that, and we'll, you know, long roads, but it's definitely something that needs to be done in a very high manner. And of course, like opera and dance could increase the dialogue to a much more riveting and like frivolous affair, like something very, very easy to understand, maybe for kids and adults too, rather than splitting the art forms apart. It would be interesting to bring some of them together and have a much richer experience, and many more dialogues happening on the stage, not just dance, but also voice and song, and then the acting in between, because opera also has that thing that ballet has, where there'll be these very common man moments where we're like just in the street and there's no ballet, we're not dancing, we're acting without words. In opera, they have words. It's like libretto and all these things, like,
yeah,
but it's not sung. It's like in Spain they have the Zarzuela, which is also similar to operas, but it's more like a play opera. So it's a lot of speaking, and then sometimes they'll break out into song. So there were also like developments to get to opera, and Zarzuela is one of the folklore practices of opera in Spain, and in Italy they had operetta, which is like before opera, like little opera. And then you had like bel canto, which is like more like the base, like the foundation. But yeah, it's like the mastering of opera. So that's the form. Like you do lots of bel canto to become a great opera singer, or you do lots of ballet classes to become a great ballet dancer. But you still need character. Character is the most important thing. And that's why I say Magdalena also, just to go on to that next question, she spoke about the success play a role at all.
Wait. Magdalena, do you want to recapitulate your question so that everyone else can understand what the question was?
Sorry to blaze.
No, because I run into this phenomena, right? That parents will put their kids in all kinds of different classes, you know, from piano to art to playing soccer to archery to etc. Okay. And most of the time it's just because you want to keep your kids busy and not getting into trouble. And then on the other hand, you also want to see what they actually love doing, right? Will they find their niche? But my question is, so in the beginning, of course, these children, they have no clue about anything. So they just stumble along. So what do you think to actually develop this passion, to find your niche, okay? How much does success in what you're doing play a role in pursuing this further and becoming from a mediocre, or, you know, not right words, but from a mediocre becoming actually an artist, okay? To actually be passionately involved and develop your talent so much further. What is that key ingredient that is needed?
Well, of course, like, okay, I mean, I'll speak from personal experience first and then principles after, but situation. First and foremost, situation. Every kid is born to a different family, and you have a certain situation, a certain dynamic that will also sculpt you. Okay, if you're rich, okay, which means we're talking now economics, like if you're free of one, and that would mean that you have a bigger responsibility to do this for your children, you would spend most days looking for what it is that your child is talented at. But then, okay, so like, okay, you might find their talent. And as a kid, like I did a lot of sports and I did a lot of different dancing. So I did like tennis, judo, swimming, football, rugby. And then also on top of that, tap, ballet, jazz, modern. And my parents had me going, but we were working class and times were desperate. And my parents decided, like, you will not live a life like ours. We will do everything in our power to make sure that we find your talent. And that's why they threw us into so many different things. Also, we had a lot of energy. And so to keep us out of trouble, you're not going to play on the street and like where we lived. You're going to go to sports clubs and you're going to become like, you're going to dance too, because I already was dancing to Michael Jackson. And so they made us all do pretty much the same thing. And it turned out that we were talented at both sports and dance, but my parents were working class, like I said, and Alex, the older brother, because both my two other brothers are professional dancers too, and professional ballet dancers. So we all went through the same school. Alex had done ballet for like 18 months and he did a competition in London where he won and he beat other boys that had gotten accepted into the Royal Ballet School. We didn't know what the Royal Ballet, my parents had no idea what the school was. So they asked the judge, you know, what to do. And the judge said, like, well, did you not do the audition? Because your boy beat all the other boys that were at the audition. And my parents didn't even know what the school was. So then the judge said, well, you have to bring your boy for a private audition. Like he's going to get a place. Lo and behold, 3 weeks later, he went to the school. It was on a full scholarship. So though he was talented at rugby and tennis as well, like super good. And my parents had an economic decision to make. So that's the situation that I mean. At some point, most parents are probably faced with this situation. That's the general dynamic today in the world. So that's where I bring in like God's plan, because it's like, okay, like I wanted to be a tennis player, right? But like God had another plan. It's like that thing of like, yeah, but because of your situation, your circumstance, and you know, like at the end of the day, you might not want to do this, but you should honor your parents because they sacrificed a lot for you to get to live the life that you live, like going to boarding school in the Royal Ballet School. Like I danced for the Queen already when I was 11 years old at a birthday party in Buckingham Palace. You know, I went from playing on Rochford in Essex on a street where most nights crime was happening to like jumping into this world that was completely alien to me, you know? It's the same for my brother too, and my other one. So circumstance sculpts you just as much as talent. And I'd say circumstance and situation sculpt you more. So you might have success with a child in certain sports, but that won't necessarily mean that you're capable as a parent of actually creating the platform for them to be able to do that and study it every day. And if that were the case, there will be other gifts. You know, like no one child is ever one-dimensional. And having studied classical ballet for 8 years in the Royal Ballet School from 11 till 19, okay, like I knew like it wasn't ideal. But it's that imperfection that actually brings me to know so much about life and the meaning of, because it wasn't ideal. And even though it wasn't ideal, it somehow ended up being ideal, because I would have never met the people I met without the experience and the sacrifices that were made. I would never come into contact with even someone like Matt Ehret. I would have never met the Schiller Institute. I would have never, ever understood certain things about classical art. And then I would have never understood philosophy the way I do. And I would have never met Julia. We would have never had a baby. And so life, like the path that we're on, as much as I have done my best to sculpt and my parents did their best to sculpt, even they will tell you, yeah, but we never saw it going like this. Like we never had any idea that you were all actually gonna end up being professionals and end up dancing all over the world in umpteen different countries. Like, no, they were just hoping that we'd have a good education. I mean, it's the Royal Ballet School, free scholarship, like what you gonna do? So in the end, we're all sat around sometimes wondering like that thing of like, how do great situations come to be? How does beauty come to be? Well, it's that you're going to struggle really hard to create something. And then when you actually realize what you've got, it won't be the thing you were trying to create. Maybe it will be like something close, but you never saw that city on the hill. Like there's this part where it's kind of a void a bit. And so just play, you know, you play with the kid, you witness as many talents as they will unveil, and then you're going to whittle it down to maybe what, 3, 4. And then by the time they're like, if it's like a Mozart case, hey, of course it's prodigious. Like, you know, it's his dad had a dream. I mean, you know, God gave him like this kid that just by 5 years old had already written his first minuet. You know, I listened to it today just to astound myself again, because this guy at 32 can't even write a lullaby. So, you know, you go on and you look at what Mozart did, you know, when he did his theme and variation on Twinkle Twinkle Little Star, but he didn't even write. He just took the theme and then variated it 18 times, like just like that. Like, you know, just because after all that form his father had taught him, he just could do that with his playfulness. He just did have that essence of like, you know what, I'm going to break those rules. Like, I know all the rules, but I'm going to break some of those rules because like there's something I want to say about this, and to do what I want to do, I have to break those rules. So like, does God really want me to stick to this, like to the point that I become like another one of those plebs? Like, no, I'm going to do something like that, you know, Bach never did. And like, that's the continuation of the principle. Like it gets greater, that good is not just in oneself. The whole construct of classical music has been built by how many composers now? And they are all a part of that immortal substance, that water that we all keep drinking from. And so it's not success that will define someone's value. And I would focus more on value, creation, value creation, rather than medals or status, because people fall on that sword too many times and it ruins the part of them that it's just simply a gift. It doesn't need to be even wrapped up and sold. It will transcend for the rest of time because it is a gift. And like any gift, it was given for free. And that was the will of one. And so they did it after much training. That's
a beautiful that's a beautiful
Thank you,
wrap
Nick.
up.
Thank
Yeah,
you,
Nick, that's
Yes.
good. And I think that sort of recapitulates again the overarching theme that sometimes was more, sometimes less, but always present and visceral throughout this whole composition, which is that ultimately we're all trying to tap into the meaning of our design as being made in the image of the creator. And that's not self-evident necessarily, because it requires the will to do work, to be humble, to think about thinking better and better when recognizing that the way you've been thinking is not working, right? And not simply ignoring the paradoxes that build up sometimes when you're holding on to a false assumption, but rather, like Schiller said, if you truly love truth, you'll be the first to tear down the edifice that might have gotten you fame, medals, honors, all of these things, because it was built on certain false assumptions. Not to say that you're wrong entirely, but you will be the first to tear it down in order to reconstruct something more perfect, as a true truth seeker, rather than trying to hold on to the false model, as too many uncreative figures in all domains have really held back our creative evolution as a species in the current day, which is behind a lot of the problems that we're facing on every single level. And personally, I would request from you and Julia, well, I mean, there's so many directions that we could take. You guys have opened up the door to so many different points to explore in greater detail. But one thing that personally I would like to see that I've never seen before, like I've done work, Cynthia's done work on as well on the arts, and just contrasting what is similar, but what is qualitatively different in the postmodernist abstract domain of the cult of ugliness that emerged in the visual arts, contrasted to the higher quality of classical painting that one could see embedded in some of the paintings you showcased in the context of today's presentation, or a Rembrandt or a Da Vinci, whose idea is always located outside of the frame, right? There's a certain realism, but at the same time, it's nothing within the frame that is the purpose of the painting. It's always outside of. And I guess that's the same thing too, sir, for what you were outlining with the best of ballet, that the theme is more than what you see on the stage. And that's what gives it the value from a transcendental place from outside that pulls you out of the smallness that you're in. And I've seen something too on music, where there was a great pianist who did something on atonalism that Pascal had done a review on. And it was a great thing, where this classical pianist was showcasing who performed Schoenberg and some atonal musical pieces. And he was like, look, here's Mozart. Here's a melody. You could even you could know where it's going to go. You could tell all the mistakes I've just made. When I make conscious mistakes, everybody in the audience who's never heard the Mozart piece could tell where the mistakes were. But here's I think it was Schoenberg that he was performing, and he's like, look, he performs the Schoenberg piece, and he asked the audience, some of whom are really adept musical experts, he's like, how many mistakes did I make here in this very well-known famous Schoenberg piece? And people can't enunciate a single one, and he's like, I made like 79 mistakes. And all of you experts couldn't even name one of them. But I've never seen this done for dance.
Also, musicians say that stuff is the hardest stuff to play, because it just has no motion. It's just horrible to play it. Like, it's horrible to dance abstract dance, because it's the same thing. You're just stepping, and it's like, but why? Like, why am I suffering so much right now? What on earth? This is still a struggle. Like, it's the same. Like, but I got no feeling, so it's really horrid. It really did put an end to I mean, our careers are coming back somewhat, but the career that we had before within the institutions, it put an end to that. Also, other political things, as you know, but it was already there. It needed to end, and God brought the curtain down and was like, "I'm gonna separate you from that lot because at the end of the day, like you ain't got no good business being there, son." So it was just that. It's just like if I'm not gonna see your spent force and like washed up on shore, like we better get this done. So thank God for COVID. I mean, I don't want to say that out loud, but like definitely. It brought me away, and it was hard. It was like, but like, yeah, no, great. In after it feels like it's been 5 years. It was like 20 months since I lost, or like we got cancelled or fired on the spot. So like, yeah, it's that like.
Well, there's definitely a blessing in disguise, and I think you guys have rolled with those punches in a very elegant and graceful manner. That is, I think, produced something that is much more of a greater potential than would have been had you guys remained in a conformist situation, as so many have in the system. So that's great. And like the thing I was building up to was I would love to see a comparative presentation on what the hell happened to dance and the cult of ugliness in dance contrasted to what some of the examples of what you just did today. Would be something down the line I'd be hungry to see, and I don't know if anybody who's done that. So
yeah, but I was going to say it would be running in also with the kind of way that the education has become so oppressive now by putting too much fixation on the technique and not enough fixation on the quality of that soul.
Right on.
And that's why we see a lot of destroyed souls before 16 with ballet, because the teachers are not talking to the individual. They're talking to a class, and everybody has to, it's a one size fits all. And it can't be like that, because then we get on stage and we're all the same. I mean, not all, but like, yeah.
Well, yeah, you hear the same thing. Like I studied in fine arts, and I still have friends who and contacts who are engaged and immersed in that domain. And I have friends as well in contacts who are in acting and who work still in the university system, and the stories you get of like the quality of culture for the students, especially in these domains, is degenerate as all hell. It's like you wouldn't, if your kid comes home saying, "Yeah, I want to go study acting," you'd be like, "No, don't." Not to say that acting is bad, but the whole cultural matrix is just so toxic in these creative domains, full of like the most insipid drug and ethical foundations. Not to say that anything is devoid of that, but it's really sharp in the so-called fine arts and creative domains these days. So yeah, just to see what the hell happened there. And you just alluded to it, I think, quite well.
It's in the form as well as it's in the sense. So like, because they detach them, that's what happens, and you can't do that. Like, you have to speak to the soul.
Yeah, and it's tragic too, because that's the most powerful domain to produce people who are the greatest, the most powerful individuals who can intervene on a society which falls into the Schiller trap of the French Revolution, right? Where the masses become too self-disorganized and mediocre and corrupted, while at the same time the elites, the leadership of society, becomes too mediocre and corrupted. So that society would be doomed were it not for, as Schiller says, the artist, who's the only one qualified to be able to break out of the doomsday scenario by being able to have a means of saying things that could not otherwise be said literally, and tap into the deeper zeitgeist, the soul of the people, in a manner that just nobody else could touch that way of doing things, right?
Exactly.
So yeah, to be able to keep those people in a controlled, to keep that creativity in a controlled box, rather than have it unleashed the way Mozart was doing with his works, or I guess Cranko and others were unleashing that power to a positive transformative effect is a serious fight. So I'm glad to see that you guys are out there. And
just to mention, it's something that I mentioned to Matt the other day. Nobody should be disenfranchised. Dvorak didn't start writing until 26. And Cranko didn't start choreographing his ballets until he was about 47. So, and Cranko never did ballet, by the way. He was born in South Africa. He came to Germany. He immersed himself within the scene in Stuttgart and Munich. Did some low budget choreographies in Stuttgart for what was called at the time the Baden-Württemberg State Theatre. It was very low budget at that moment. Turned out his choreographies were very good. Then they gave him full control of like directorship of the Baden-Württemberg. He changed the name to the Stuttgart Ballet. Then his choreographies were so good, he put literally Stuttgart on the world map. And then they offered him the directorship of Munich Ballet as well. And, 20 years later, he was the next classical development of ballet up until basically the 60s. And that's where for me, that's basically from there, the slippery slope just got even more slippery. Like it just got worse and worse and worse. But he was the last star in the sky in terms of classical ballet.
Cool. Well, I think that this wraps up today's presentation very well, and I'm looking forward to continuing to see what you guys creatively produce going forward. And for those who may not be aware, this coming Wednesday night, 7 p.m., which you guys in Spain probably aren't going to be able to make it. I think it's going to be like 2 a.m. But at 7 p.m. Eastern time, we'll have a presentation on the untold history of China with a focus on some of the lesser appreciated dynamics of what Mao was doing from a physical economic standpoint, and the battles between the Kuomintang and Mao and his network, as well as how that related to some of the battles that were happening in the United States as well as within Russia. So that'll be this Wednesday, and then next Sunday, we're going to have Joaquin Flores, who's going to do a geopolitical masterclass, which I'm very much looking forward to, and then we'll do some stuff on science the weeks after that. So thank you, everybody.
Wait, what's the great news?
Oh, Magda, you're so amazing.
Damn, right. Wow, thank you, Magda.
I asked this dear woman who's been with me for 11 years now to marry me today in Alhambra Palace, just down in Granada. And I'm also marrying our baby boy who came out about 4 months ago. And she said yes.
Yes.
So,
Right.
thank you. Thank you. Now, it's been a great day, and this class just capped it off. So thank you so much, everyone. And we'll see you all soon in Canada.
So happy for you. So happy. Congratulations.
Congrats.
Congratulations. Thank you.
Thank you so much.
Hey, bye, guys.
Bye-bye.